kind-hearted girl saved 5-year-old boy, didn't expect CEO to see her face and marry her on the spot. Hi, my very beautiful, loyal and greatest family. Today my heart is trembling with gratitude. We are 19,000 strong, and this moment belongs to you. Every word I speak, every story I write, it's your love that gives it meaning. You didn't just help me grow, you became the reason I never gave up. Through every late night and silent prayer, it was your support that lit my path. You are not just part of this journey, you are the soul of it. Without you, Mr. Peter Stories would not exist. A powerful prayer for you, my beloved family. May blessings chase after you with open arms. May your heart never lack peace. May your home overflow with joy. And may your loyalty to this family return to you in divine ways, bigger, brighter, and more beautiful than you ever dreamed. If this journey means something to you, please write congratulations in the comments. Our next target is 20K. Let's rise higher together. Please make sure you're subscribed and don't forget to like, comment and share this video so the love we've built can reach even more hearts. From Mr. Peter, with unshakable love and gratitude, thank you. This is our story and it's only just beginning. The autumn wind scattered golden leaves across the park pathway as Leslie Alve gathered her kindergarten students for their weekly nature walk. Her dark curls danced in the breeze, momentarily obscuring her view as she counted heads for the third. "A time! Remember, little explorers, stay where I can see you," she called out, her voice warm yet firm. 20 pairs of eager eyes looked back at her, bobbing heads promising obedience that would likely last all of 5 minutes. Leslie loved these children with her whole heart. Teaching wasn't just her profession, it was her calling. Each child represented a future she helped shape, a responsibility she never took lightly despite her modest salary and the challenges of working in an underfunded school. "Miss Alve, look at my leaf collection." 5-year-old Zoe proudly displayed a handful of crimson and amber treasures. "Those are beautiful." Leslie knelt down, giving the little girl her full attention. "Do you know what kind of tree?" A sudden commotion interrupted her. Turning sharply, Leslie saw several children pointing and shouting. Her heart dropped when she realized what was happening. A small boy had broken away from the group, chasing after a bright blue ball that bounced traitorously toward the busy street bordering the park. "Thomas, stop!" another teacher called, but the boy was too focused on his prize, his little legs carrying him faster than anyone expected. Time slowed to a crawl as Leslie's body moved before her mind could process danger. She sprinted toward the child, adrenaline propelling her forward with singular focus. The ball bounced once on the asphalt as Thomas reached the curb. "No!" The scream tore from her throat as the boy stepped into the street, directly into the path of oncoming traffic. Leslie lunged forward, arms outstretched, her body curling protectively around Thomas as she pulled him back. They tumbled together onto the sidewalk as a sleek black car screeched to a halt mere inches from where they had been. Pain shot through her elbow and hip where they'd struck the concrete, but Leslie barely registered it. "Are you hurt?" she whispered, running gentle hands over Thomas's small frame, checking for injuries. The little boy, more startled than frightened, shook his head. "My ball," he whimpered, pointing to where it now lay crushed beneath another vehicle. "We'll find another ball," Leslie promised, pulling him close. "What matters is that you're safe." Only then did she become aware of the commotion around them. The other teacher rushing over with the children, passers-by stopping to stare, and the sound of a car door opening. "Is he all right?" A deep voice, rich with concern, made Leslie look up. The man standing over them cast a long shadow against the autumn sun. Tall and imposing in an impeccably tailored suit, he had emerged from the black car that had nearly hit them. His features were sharp, almost severe in their handsomeness, but it was his eyes that caught Leslie's attention, intense and dark, currently wide with alarm. "We're okay," she answered automatically, still cradling Thomas protectively. "Just scraped and scared." The man knelt down, bringing himself to their level, his gaze sweeping over the boy before settling on Leslie's face. Something flickered in those eyes, recognition though they'd never met, and something deeper that made her heart stutter unexpectedly. "What you did was incredible," he said quietly, his voice meant only for her. "And incredibly reckless. You could have been killed." Leslie bristled at his tone, which had shifted from concern to admonishment. "And what would you have done? Watched him get hit?" she retorted, her protective instincts still in high gear. For a moment, they stared at each other, an inexplicable tension crackling between them. His expression softened slightly, as if he recognized something in her that caught him off guard. "Paul Gilbert," he said finally, offering his hand. Leslie shifted Thomas to her side, wincing slightly at the pain in her elbow. "Leslie Alve," she replied, placing her hand in his. The contact sent an unexpected current through her. His hand was warm, firm, and somehow familiar despite its unfamiliarity. Paul seemed to feel it too. His eyes widened slightly, and he held her hand a moment, longer than necessary. The spell broke when Thomas tugged at Leslie's sleeve. "Miss Alve, I'm sorry," he whispered, his bottom lip trembling. Leslie turned her attention back to the child, her voice gentle. "It's okay, sweetheart. Just remember to stay with the group next time." She helped him stand, brushing leaves from his jacket. When she looked up again, Paul was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Admiration, certainly, but also curiosity, as if she were a puzzle he was trying to solve. "Thomas," he said suddenly, his eyes still on Leslie, "is your Aunt Diane coming to pick you up?" The little boy nodded. "She's going to be late. That's why I'm on the field trip." Leslie looked between them, confused. "You know each other?" Paul's smile was warm as he looked at Thomas. "He's my nephew." The revelation caught her by surprise. There was nothing physical connecting the polished businessman with the tousle-haired 5-year-old in a dinosaur jacket, yet something in the way. Paul's face softened when he looked at the boy, spoke of genuine affection. "I should call his mother," Paul said, pulling out his phone. "She'll want to know what happened." As he stepped away to make the call, the other teacher approached, checking on Leslie and Thomas. Paramedics arrived shortly after, insisting on examining them both, despite Leslie's protests that they were fine. Through it all, Leslie was aware of Paul's presence, the way he hung back, giving them space, but never leaving, his eyes frequently returning to her face when he thought she wasn't looking. By the time Thomas's mother arrived, a stylish woman whose resemblance to Paul was immediately apparent in the sharp line of her jaw and the intensity of her gaze, a small crowd had gathered. The paramedics were finishing their examination, declaring both Leslie and Thomas miraculously uninjured, except for minor scrapes. "Thomas!" Diane rushed forward, gathering her son into a fierce embrace. "What were you thinking, running into the street like that?" "I just wanted my ball," Thomas mumbled against her shoulder. "You could have been—" Diane's voice caught, unable to finish the thought. She looked up at Leslie, her eyes swimming with tears. "Thank you. They told me what you did." Leslie shook her head. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Paul interjected, his voice low and certain. "They wouldn't have." There was something in the way he said it that made Leslie's cheeks warm. She looked away, suddenly self-conscious under his steady gaze. The rest of the field trip was cancelled. The children loaded back onto their bus with excited chatter about the day's unexpected drama. As Leslie prepared to board, she felt a hand on her arm. "Miss Alve." Paul stood there, his expression unreadable. "I'd like to properly thank you for what you did today. Perhaps dinner." Leslie blinked, caught off guard by the invitation. "That's really not necessary. I was just doing my job." Diving into traffic isn't in any teacher's job description. A hint of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Please, it would mean a lot to me and to Thomas's family. Something about the way he looked at her made refusing difficult. Those eyes, they seemed to see straight through her defenses. I don't think, Miss Alve, Thomas called from where he stood with his mother. Are you coming to dinner with Uncle Paul? Leslie hesitated, torn between her instinct to maintain professional boundaries and something else, a curiosity, a pull toward this man that defied logical explanation. Just dinner, Paul said softly, as if sensing her reluctance. To say thank you. Before she could answer, her colleague called from the bus, reminding her they needed to return to school. I have to go, Leslie said, stepping back. Paul reached into his pocket and handed her a business card. Think about it, he said, his fingers brushing hers as she took the card. That same electric current passed between them, stronger this time, impossible to ignore. Leslie looked up, meeting his gaze, and for a moment neither seemed able to look away. I'll think about it, she promised, finally breaking eye contact. As the bus pulled away from the curb, Leslie found herself looking back, surprised to see Paul still standing there, watching as they departed. She touched the card in her pocket, wondering why her heart was racing so inexplicably. She told herself it was just the lingering adrenaline from the rescue, nothing more. Yet the memory of his eyes, the warmth of his hand against hers, the way he'd looked at her with such intensity, these thoughts followed her long after the park had disappeared from view. What Leslie didn't know then, couldn't have known, was that in saving Thomas, she had set in motion events that would change her life forever. For in that moment of crisis, when she'd acted without thought for her own safety, she had done more than rescue a child. She had awakened something in Paul Gilbert's carefully guarded heart, something he had thought long dead, something that, now having seen her, he could no longer ignore. Chapter 2, The Unexpected Visit. 3 days after the incident at the park, Leslie stood at her classroom whiteboard, guiding her students through a counting exercise. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the colorful artwork adorning the walls, a cheerful contrast to the aging facility itself. Now who can tell me how many apples are in the basket? She asked, pointing to the illustration she'd drawn. 20 hands shot into the air, eager tiny voices calling out, Me! Me! Leslie smiled, her heart warming despite the dull ache that persisted in her elbow from her sidewalk tumble. Zoe, what do you think? She called on a small girl with braids who had been waiting patiently. Before Zoe could answer, a knock at the classroom door drew everyone's attention. The school secretary poked her head in, her expression a mix of confusion and curiosity. Miss Alve, you have a visitor in the office. Says it's important. Leslie frowned. She never received visitors during class hours. It was an unspoken rule she maintained to keep her focus on her students. I'm in the middle of a lesson. Can they wait until lunch? The secretary shook her head. It's Paul Gilbert. The name sent an unexpected flutter through Leslie's chest. The man from the park, Thomas's uncle. She'd thought about him more than she cared to admit over the past few days. His business card still sitting on her nightstand, where she'd placed it, untouched, yet not forgotten. Ms. Hernandez, she called to her teaching assistant, would you mind continuing the counting lesson? I'll be back shortly. Walking down the faded hallway, Leslie smoothed her simple cotton dress and tucked a wayward curl behind her ear. Immediately, chiding herself for the self-conscious gesture, why should she care how she looked for this unexpected visitor? She pushed open the office door, and there he was, tall and commanding in another impeccable suit, looking utterly out of place among the worn furniture and outdated decor. He held a small bouquet of white and yellow daisies, simple yet elegant. Mr. Gilbert, she said formally, conscious of the secretary's curious eyes. This is a surprise. Paul turned, and the smile that crossed his face made her pulse quicken. Inexplicably, Miss Alve. He stepped toward her, extending the flowers. "I hope I'm not interrupting your day too severely." "I'm in the middle of teaching," she replied, not taking the bouquet immediately. "What brings you to West Side Elementary?" "You," he said simply, with a directness that caught her off guard. "I wanted to check how you were doing after the incident, and to thank you properly." The secretary wasn't even pretending not to listen now, her eyes darting between them like she was watching a tennis match. "Perhaps we could step outside?" Leslie suggested, finally accepting the flowers with a nod of thanks. In the small courtyard just outside the main entrance, autumn leaves crunched beneath their feet as an awkward silence settled between them. "How's Thomas?" Leslie asked finally, clutching the daisies like a shield, completely recovered. "He's been talking non-stop about his superhero teacher." Paul's mouth curved into a half-smile. His mother finally had to buy him a new blue ball, just to stop him from reenacting the rescue for every visitor. Leslie laughed, despite herself, picturing the energetic boy's dramatic retelling. "I'm glad he's okay. Children are remarkably resilient." "Unlike adults," Paul added, his eyes tracking to her arm, where she unconsciously rubbed her injured elbow. "You're hurt." "It's nothing. Just a bruise." "Did you see a doctor?" "For a bruise?" Leslie raised an eyebrow. "Teachers get worse injuries." "Breaking up playground disputes," Paul frowned, reaching into his jacket. "I'd like to cover any medical expenses you might have." "It's the least I can do, considering—" "No." The word came out sharper than intended, stopping him mid-motion. "Thank you, but that's not necessary." His brow furrowed. "You saved my nephew's life, Miss Alve. Allow me some small way to express my gratitude." "The flowers are lovely," she said, softening her tone, "but I don't need or want your money, Mr. Gilbert." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps even admiration. "Most people aren't so quick to refuse my help." "I'm not most people." Leslie met his gaze steadily, and what I did wasn't about getting something in return. The corner of Paul's mouth twitched. "No, you certainly aren't like most people I meet." He studied her face with an intensity that made her want to look away, yet somehow she couldn't. "At least let me take you to dinner. No strings attached, just a meal to say thank you." Leslie hesitated. There was something about this man that both intrigued and unsettled her. In her world of lesson plans and finger paintings, Paul Gilbert seemed like a character from another universe, one of sleek skyscrapers and boardrooms so far removed from her daily reality. "I appreciate the offer, but—" "Uncle Paul!" A high-pitched voice interrupted her refusal. They both turned to see Thomas running toward them, his backpack bouncing wildly, followed by a harried-looking woman Leslie recognized as his mother, Diane. "Thomas, I told you to wait by the car," Diane called, quickening her pace to catch up with her son. The boy launched himself at Paul, who caught him effortlessly, swinging him up into a hug before setting him down. Thomas immediately turned his attention to Leslie, his eyes wide with excitement. "Miss Alve, you're still my teacher, even though you don't teach at my school?" Leslie knelt down, bringing herself to his eye level. "No, sweetheart. I teach kindergarten here at West Side. But it's wonderful to see you again. Look." Thomas pulled up his sleeve to reveal a colorful bandage. "I got a scratch just like yours. Mom says I'm brave like you." "Very brave," Leslie agreed, smiling at his enthusiasm. Diane approached, offering Leslie an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry about the interruption. Thomas has been begging to see you again. When Paul mentioned he was stopping by—" "It's fine," Leslie assured her, standing back up. "He's a delightful boy." "Who apparently has a flair for drama," Diane said dryly. "He's told everyone at his school about his adventure with the heroic teacher." Thomas tugged at Leslie's hand. "Are you coming to dinner with us? Uncle Paul said he was going to ask you." Leslie glanced at Paul, who had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I hadn't quite gotten to that part yet, buddy," he said, ruffling Thomas's hair. "Please come," Thomas pleaded, his eyes wide and hopeful. "Mum makes the best spaghetti in the whole world." Leslie looked from Thomas's eager face to Diane's polite smile to Paul's quietly expectant expression. Something about the tableau they created, this little family unit with a space that seemed, for this moment at least, shaped exactly for her, tugged at a lonely place in her heart she usually kept carefully guarded. I have papers to grade." "Tonight?" she said, the excuse sounding weak even to her own ears. "Tomorrow, then," Paul suggested, undeterred. "Saturday. No papers to grade, I presume," Diane chimed in. "Thomas would love it, and honestly so would I. It's the least we can do." Leslie looked down at the daisies in her hand. Simple, unpretentious flowers that somehow seemed to represent the sincerity of their invitation. "All right," she conceded finally. "Saturday." Thomas cheered, jumping up and down with excitement. Diane smiled, genuinely this time, and pulled a phone from her purse to exchange contact information. Throughout the exchange, Leslie was acutely aware of Paul watching her, his dark eyes missing nothing. When their gazes met, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of the strange circumstances that had brought them together, or maybe something deeper neither was ready to acknowledge. As they prepared to leave, Paul reached out, his fingers lightly touching Leslie's arm. "Until tomorrow," he said softly, his voice carrying a promise that sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Tomorrow," she echoed, suddenly breathless. She stood in the courtyard long after they'd gone, the daisies clutched in her hand, wondering why she felt as though she'd just stepped off the edge of something high and was now in free fall. The school bell rang, startling her from her thoughts. As she turned to go back inside, Leslie glanced down at the flowers once more. Despite her best efforts to remain detached, a small smile curved her lips. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. Chapter 3. Breaking Barriers. Leslie stood before her closet, anxiety mounting as she surveyed her limited options. Everything she owned seemed suddenly inadequate for dinner at Diane Gilbert's home. A home she imagined would reflect the same polished elegance as its owners. "It's just dinner," she murmured to herself, pulling out a simple blue dress she'd worn to her college graduation. Not a state function. Still, her hands trembled slightly as she applied a touch of mascara, a rare concession to vanity for a woman who typically rushed out the door with just moisturizer. Her phone chimed with a text message. "Car will pick. You up at 6? Looking forward to seeing you." Paul. A car? Leslie frowned. She'd planned to take the bus, having mapped out the route to the address Diane had given her. The thought of being chauffeured made her uncomfortable, highlighting the vast differences in their circumstances. She typed back, "No need for a car. I can make my own way there." His response came immediately, "I insist. Consider it part of the invitation." Leslie sighed, knowing further protest would seem petty. As she slipped on her only pair of heels, sensible 2-inch pumps she kept for parent-teacher conferences, she wondered again why she'd agreed to this dinner. Was it Thomas's eager face, or something in Paul's eyes when he'd looked at her? At precisely 6 p.m., a sleek black sedan pulled up outside her modest apartment building. The driver, a professional-looking woman, greeted her warmly and held the "Douber, Miss Alve. Mr. Gilbert asked me to ensure you arrive comfortably." The interior of the car was luxurious without being ostentatious. Soft leather seats and a faint scent of pine. Leslie sat stiffly, clutching the small gift she'd brought. For Thomas, a children's book about bravery she often read to her students. As they drove from her working-class neighborhood toward the affluent suburbs, the contrast between her world and the Gilberts became increasingly apparent. Streets grew wider, houses larger, until they passed through wrought iron gates into a community that seemed designed to keep the rest of the world at bay. Diane's home, when they finally arrived, was not the mansion Leslie had feared, but a spacious contemporary house with warm lighting glowing from within. As the car pulled into the circular driveway, the front door opened, and Thomas burst out, followed at a more sedate pace by Paul and Diane. "Miss Alve, you came!" Thomas raced toward her as she emerged from the car. "I promised I would," she smiled, steadied by the boy's genuine excitement. She handed him the wrapped book. "I brought you something." Thomas accepted the gift with wide eyes, immediately tearing into the paper with childish abandon. "Thomas, manners," Diane chided gently, approaching, with a welcoming smile. She wore slim-fitting jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Leslie's monthly rent, yet her demeanor was surprisingly unpretentious. "We're so glad you could join us, Leslie." "Thank you for having me," Leslie replied, feeling some of her tension ease at Diane's genuine warmth. It was Paul's approach that rekindled her nerves. Unlike his sister and nephew, who were all eager movement, Paul moved with deliberate grace, his eyes never leaving her face. In dark jeans and a crisp button-down shirt, he looked more accessible than in his business suits, yet no less imposing. "You look lovely," he said quietly when he reached her, the simple compliment carrying more weight than elaborate flattery might have. "It's a brave book," Thomas exclaimed, having unwrapped his gift. "Just like us." He clutched the book to his chest like a treasure. Paul's smile as he watched his nephew was tender, revealing a gentleness Leslie hadn't fully glimpsed before. "Shall we go inside? It's getting chilly out here." The interior of the house reflected the same understated elegance as its exterior, beautiful without being showy, comfortable rather than intimidating. Family photos lined the hallway, many featuring Thomas at various ages, often accompanied by Paul. "My brother practically lives here half the time," Diane explained, following Leslie's gaze. "Since Thomas's father—" She trailed off, exchanging a look with Paul that spoke of shared pain. "Let's get you a drink," Paul suggested, guiding Leslie toward the kitchen with a light touch at the small of her back. The brief contact sent a flutter of warmth up her spine. The kitchen was a chef's dream, all gleaming surfaces and professional-grade appliances, yet homey with children's artwork magnetized to the refrigerator and the welcoming aroma of tomato sauce simmering on the stove. "Wine?" Paul offered, holding up a bottle. "Just water for now, thank you," Leslie replied, accepting the glass he poured her. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, a momentary touch that shouldn't have felt as significant as it did. Leslie took a quick sip of water to hide her reaction. "Uncle." "Paul, can I show Miss Alve my room?" Thomas bounced on his toes, barely containing his excitement. "If Miss Alve would like to see it," Paul replied, looking to Leslie with a raised eyebrow. "I'd love to," she said, grateful for the chance to escape the intensity of Paul's gaze for a moment. Thomas grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the stairs. "I have all the dinosaurs, and a telescope, and books about space." As they climbed the stairs, Leslie glanced back to find Paul watching them, an expression on his face she couldn't quite decipher, something between wonder and longing that made her heart skip a beat. Thomas's room was exactly what a 5-year-old boy's sanctuary should be, colorful, slightly chaotic, and filled with evidence of an active imagination. Dinosaur models competed for space with Lego creations, while a small telescope pointed out the window toward the evening sky. "This is where I sleep," Thomas announced proudly, patting his bed with its rocket ship comforter. "And this is where I keep my special things." He pulled open a drawer in his bedside table. From within, he extracted a slightly crumpled drawing and handed it to Leslie. It depicted 3 stick figures, a small one labeled Me, a taller one with curly hair labeled Miss Alve, and a third, tallest figure labeled Uncle Paul. They were all holding hands, with a crudely drawn car in the background. "It's us," Thomas explained seriously. "When you saved me." Leslie swallowed against a sudden tightness in her throat. "It's beautiful, Thomas. Uncle Paul has it on his phone too. I saw him looking at it when he thought I was sleeping." Before Leslie could process this revelation, Diane called up that dinner was ready. Thomas bounded down the stairs while Leslie followed more slowly. The image of Paul studying a child's drawing of the three of them together lingering in her mind. Dinner was a surprisingly relaxed affair. Diane proved to be an excellent cook, the promised spaghetti, accompanied by fresh garlic bread and a salad that put Leslie's usual microwave meals to shame. The conversation flowed naturally, focused largely on Thomas's school adventures and Leslie's experiences as a teacher. It wasn't until after the meal, when Thomas had been permitted to show Leslie his favorite cartoon before bedtime, that the adults settled in the living room with coffee and the conversation turned more personal. "Paul tells me you refused his offer of help," Diane said, her direct approach reminiscent of her brother's. "Most people would have jumped at it." Leslie set her coffee cup down carefully. "I didn't do what I did expecting payment. Few genuine acts of kindness come with expectations," Paul noted, his eyes never leaving her face. "That doesn't mean they shouldn't be acknowledged." "Your being here is acknowledgement enough," Leslie replied. "Thomas is a wonderful boy. You both should be very proud." A shadow crossed Diane's face. "His father left when Thomas was 2, said he wasn't cut out for family life." Her bitter tone suggested deeper wounds. "Paul has been more of a father than Thomas's biological one ever was." Leslie glanced at Paul, seeing him in a new light, the powerful businessman who spent his free time reading bedtime stories to his nephew, who kept a child's drawing on his phone. "Family isn't always about blood," Leslie said softly, thinking of her own grandmother who had raised her after her parents' death. "It's about who stays when it would be easier to leave." Something in her words resonated deeply with Paul. He leaned forward, his expression intense. "Exactly. It's about choice. Every day, choosing to be there." Their eyes locked, and for a moment, the rest of the room seemed to fade away. Leslie felt as though Paul could see straight through to her core, to the loneliness she kept hidden, to the yearning for connection she rarely acknowledged, even to herself. The moment broke when Thomas called from the other room, asking for a glass of water. Diane rose to attend to him, leaving Leslie and Paul alone. "Thank you for coming tonight," Paul said, his voice lower, more intimate in his sister's absence. "It meant a lot to Thomas, and to me." "I'm glad I came," Leslie admitted. "It wasn't what I expected." "What did you expect?" She hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Something colder, more formal, less real." Paul's smile held a hint of sadness. "People see the suit, the company, the name. They rarely look for the person behind them." "And what would they find if they did?" she asked, surprised by her own boldness. Paul held her gaze, the vulnerability in his eyes taking her breath away. Someone who's been waiting to be seen, really seen. The air between them seemed charged with unspoken possibilities. Leslie found herself leaning forward slightly, drawn by some invisible force toward this complex man who was nothing like she'd first assumed. The sound of Diane's returning footsteps broke the spell. Leslie straightened, reaching for her coffee cup with hands that weren't quite steady. As the evening drew to a close, Paul insisted on driving Leslie home himself, waving away her protests about inconveniencing him. "It's on my way," he said, though they both knew it wasn't. The drive was quiet, a comfortable silence punctuated by the soft sounds of classical music from the car's speakers. When they pulled up outside her apartment building, so different from the home they'd left behind, Leslie expected to feel embarrassed. Instead, she found herself simply wanting Paul to know her, truly know her, beyond the circumstances that had brought them together. "Thank you," she said as he walked her to her door, the night air cool against her skin. for everything. Leslie. Paul said her name like it was something precious. He stepped closer, his eyes questioning. May I see you again? Not for Thomas, not for my sister, for me. The vulnerability in his request, so at odds with the powerful man she'd first met, touched something deep within her. Whatever barriers had existed between them, of class, of circumstance, of first impressions, seemed suddenly as insubstantial as mist. Yes, she whispered, her heart racing as he leaned in, his hand gently cupping her cheek. Their first kiss was tentative, a soft brush of lips that held the promise of more. When they parted, both were breathing faster, eyes wide with the recognition of something unexpected, yet somehow inevitable. Good night, Leslie Alve, Paul murmured, reluctantly, stepping back. Good night, Paul Gilbert, she replied, her fingers touching her lips as though to preserve the feeling of his kiss. She watched him drive away, standing in the glow of the streetlight long after his car had disappeared from view. The night felt different somehow, filled with possibilities she had never considered before. Whatever tomorrow might bring, Leslie knew one thing with certainty: the barriers between their worlds had begun to crumble, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. Chapter 4. Worlds Colliding. Mr. Gilbert, your 10 o'clock appointment is waiting. Paul nodded absently at his assistant, his attention fixed on his phone screen. The text from Leslie had been simple, just a photo of a drawing one of her students had made of a businessman's superhero after she'd mentioned Paul's visit to their classroom. Yet he found himself smiling at it for the third time that morning. 3 weeks had passed since their dinner at Diane's. 3 weeks of coffee dates, long phone conversations that stretched into the early hours, and stolen moments that left him craving more. Paul had dated many women over the years, but none had captivated him like this kindergarten teacher, with her unassuming strength and genuine heart. Sir, the investors are waiting. His assistant's voice held a hint of concern. Right. Paul pocketed his phone, straightening his tie as he refocused on the business at hand. Tell them I'll be right there. As he gathered his presentation materials, his phone vibrated with another message. Good luck with your meeting. The finger-painting superheroes believe in you. The message shouldn't have made his heart race like a teenager's, but it did. Later, that evening, Paul stood outside Leslie's classroom, watching through the half-open door as she prepared for the next day's lessons. The setting sun bathed the room in golden light, illuminating her focused expression as she arranged materials on tiny desks. She looked up, startled, when he knocked lightly on the doorframe. Paul, I didn't expect you until 7. Her smile was immediate, lighting up her face in a way that made his chest tighten. Meeting ended early. He stepped inside, taking in the colorful, carefully maintained space that reflected so much of her personality. I wanted to see where the magic happens, Leslie laughed, gesturing around the modest classroom. Not exactly the corporate boardroom you're used to. Much better, Paul said sincerely, running his fingers over a bookshelf lined with well-loved children's stories. No one in my boardroom creates superhero drawings of me. Moving closer, he pulled her gently into his arms, inhaling the light floral scent of her hair. I missed you today. It's only been 2 days, she murmured against his chest, though her arms tightened around him, betraying that she'd felt his absence too. Too long, he whispered, tilting her chin up for a kiss that quickly deepened, sending heat coursing through him. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing raggedly. I have something for you, Paul said, reluctantly stepping back. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Leslie's eyes widened. Paul, it's not what you think, he assured her quickly, opening the box to reveal a delicate silver bracelet. It's a thank you for showing me what matters." Relief and something like disappointment flickered across her face before she smiled, allowing him to fasten the bracelet. Around her wrist, the simple silver chain held a small charm in the shape of a shield. "My protector," he explained, his voice husky with emotion. Their eyes met, and the intensity of feeling between them was almost overwhelming. 3 weeks wasn't long enough to name what was growing between them, yet Paul knew with bone-deep certainty that Leslie Alve had become essential to him in ways he was only beginning to understand. "There's a charity gala this weekend," he said, his fingers tracing patterns on her wrist where the bracelet glinted. "I'd like you to come with me." Leslie hesitated. "Paul, that's your world. Corporate executives, society people. I wouldn't fit in." "You'd be with me," he countered, bringing her hand to his lips. "That's all that matters." Despite her reservations, Leslie found herself agreeing, which is how, 3 nights later, she came to be standing in front of the mirror in a borrowed evening gown, midnight blue and elegant, feeling like an imposter. The dress was on loan from Diane, who had surprisingly become an ally, insisting that Leslie allow her this small gesture of friendship. "If you're going to face the wolves," Diane had said with characteristic bluntness, "you might as well look spectacular doing it." The woman staring back from the mirror looked nothing like the kindergarten teacher who spent her days with finger paints and alphabet songs. This woman looked sophisticated, beautiful even, but Leslie wasn't sure she recognized herself. When Paul arrived to pick her up, the appreciation in his eyes as he took in her transformation made the discomfort worth it. "You look breathtaking," he said, his voice dropping to that intimate tone that never failed to send shivers through her. The venue for the gala was a historic hotel downtown, its ballroom transformed into a glittering wonderland of lights and flowers. As they entered, Leslie felt the weight of curious stares. Paul Gilbert never brought dates to these functions, she'd learned, a fact that made their entrance something of a sensation. "Ignore them," Paul murmured, his hand warm and steady at the small of her back. "They're just jealous." Throughout the evening, Paul remained attentive, introducing her to countless people whose names blurred together. Some were genuinely welcoming, others assessed her with barely concealed skepticism, their smiles not reaching their eyes. "So you're a teacher," one elegantly dressed woman commented, her tone making the profession sound like a curious hobby. "How fulfilling that must be." "It is," Leslie replied simply, refusing to be diminished. "Nothing compares to watching a child discover their potential." The woman's companion, a silver-haired man with shrewd eyes, gave Paul an appraising look. "Quite a departure from your usual companions, Gilbert." Something dangerous flashed in Paul's eyes, but before he could respond, Leslie placed a calming hand on his arm. "I'll take that as a compliment," she said sweetly, guiding Paul away. "I'm sorry," he said once they were out of earshot. "I should have warned you that your friends would be judgmental." Leslie shook her head. "People are the same everywhere, Paul. They just wear different clothes." Her insight struck him anew. This woman, who had so little in material terms compared to the people who filled his daily life, possessed a wealth of understanding that put them to shame. As the evening progressed, Leslie excused herself to find the restroom, needing a moment. Away from the curious stares and polite interrogations, in the quiet hallway outside the ballroom, she overheard voices around the corner. "Gilbert's charity case," a woman's voice said dismissively. "He's always had a weakness for strays." "She won't last a month," a man replied. "What could someone like her possibly offer someone like him? It's not as if she brings connections or family influence." Leslie froze, their cruel assessment cutting deeper than she wanted to admit. The doubts she'd been fighting since that first dinner with Paul surged back, the vast differences in their worlds, the improbability of what was growing between them. "There you are," Paul's voice behind her made her jump. His expression darkened as he recognized something in her face. "What happened?" "Nothing," she lied, forcing a smile. "It's just overwhelming." Paul studied her, his gaze penetrating. Without a word, he took her hand and led her through a side door onto a deserted terrace overlooking the city lights. "Tell me," he insisted gently, his hands coming up to frame her face. Under the warmth of his touch, her resistance crumbled. "They're right," she whispered. "We don't make sense, Paul. Your world and mine, they're too different. Do you think I care about any of that?" The fierceness in his voice caught her off guard. Those people in there, with their judgments and their shallow values, they don't know the first thing about what matters. His thumbs brushed her cheeks, wiping away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "You matter, Leslie. What I feel when I'm with you, that matters." The raw emotion in his voice stripped away her defenses. When his lips found hers, the kiss was different from their others, desperate, consuming, as if he was trying to pour all his certainty into her. Leslie responded. With equal fervor, her doubts temporarily drowned in the flood of feeling between them. In that moment, with the night sky above and the city lights below, nothing existed but the two of them and the impossible, exhilarating connection that defied explanation. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Paul rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling in love with you, Leslie Alve," he whispered, the confession clearly costing him the control he prized. "And it terrifies me." The vulnerability in his admission shook her to her core. This powerful man, who commanded respect in boardrooms and ballrooms alike, was laying his heart bare before her. "It terrifies me too," she admitted, her voice trembling with the weight of truth. "But I'm falling too." Their eyes met in shared recognition of the precipice they stood upon together, a point of no return, where the separate paths of their lives converged into a single, uncertain future that promised either extraordinary joy or devastating heartbreak. Neither knew which awaited them, but as Paul drew her close again, his kiss a silent promise in the moonlight, Leslie knew with sudden clarity that whatever came next, this moment, this connection, was worth any risk. Chapter 5. External pressures. The morning sun filtered through thin curtains as Leslie hurried around her apartment, gathering materials for her class. Her phone buzzed with a text from Paul. "Missing you already. Dinner tonight?" A smile touched her lips as she typed back a quick yes. 2 months into their relationship, and still her heart raced at the mere thought of seeing him. The vibration of another incoming call wiped the smile from her face, the hospital's number flashing on her screen. Her grandmother, her only family, had been admitted 3 days ago with pneumonia that was proving resistant to treatment. "Ms. Alve, Dr. Patel here. Your grandmother's condition has worsened. We'd like you to come in as soon as possible." This world tilted beneath Leslie's feet. "I'll be right there." She called the school, arranging for a substitute, then grabbed her keys with shaking hands. As she rushed to her car, a 15-year-old sedan that protested loudly when she turned the key, her phone rang again. "Paul." "Hey, I was just—" he began cheerfully. "My grandmother's worse," Leslie cut in, her voice cracking. "I'm heading to the hospital now." "Which hospital?" The immediate shift in his tone, from casual to intensely focused, steadied her slightly. "I'll meet you there. You don't have to—" "I'm already on my way," he said firmly. "Just drive safely." At the hospital, Paul was waiting in the lobby, his usual impeccable suit standing out among the worried families in casual clothes. The moment he saw her, he crossed the space between them and enfolded her in his arms. "I'm here," he murmured, against her hair, his strength flowing into her like a current. "Whatever you need." Dr. Patel confirmed her fears. Her grandmother's condition had deteriorated significantly. The infection isn't responding to standard antibiotics. We'd like to try a specialized treatment, but the unspoken issue hung in the air. Cost. Even with insurance, the treatment would be expensive. Do whatever's necessary, Leslie said firmly, pushing aside financial concerns for the moment. Her grandmother was all she had left. Later, alone in the hospital cafeteria while her grandmother slept, Leslie stared blankly at spreadsheets on her laptop, calculating, recalculating, trying to find money that wasn't there. "Talk to me," Paul said softly, pushing a cup of tea toward her. He'd stayed with her all day, his quiet support a ballast against her rising panic. "I don't know how I'm going to afford this," she admitted, the words painful to speak aloud. "Even with insurance, the out-of-pocket is more than I have." Paul's hand covered hers. "Let me help." The gentle offer broke something in her. "I can't ask that of you." "You're not asking. I'm offering." His eyes held hers, sincere and determined. "Please, Leslie, let me do this for you. For her." Pride warred with practicality as Leslie considered his offer. Her grandmother needed the treatment immediately. There was no time to arrange loans or sell possessions. "Okay," she whispered finally, the acceptance both relief and burden. "But it's a loan. I'll pay you back." Paul didn't argue, simply nodded and squeezed her hand. "Consider it done." The next morning, Dr. Patel informed them that all financial arrangements had been made and treatment would begin immediately. What Leslie didn't know was that Paul had done more than simply cover the treatment. He'd arranged for one of the country's leading pulmonary specialists to consult on her grandmother's case. 3 days later, showing the first signs of improvement, her grandmother fixed Leslie with a knowing look. "This young man of yours," she said, her voice weak but determined. "He's behind all this special treatment, isn't he?" Leslie hesitated, then nodded. He wanted to help. The older woman's eyes, so like Leslie's own, softened. "Bring him to me. I want to look him in the eyes." When Paul entered the room that evening, Leslie's grandmother subjected him to an assessment so thorough it would have made corporate negotiators squirm. Paul stood tall under her scrutiny, answering her direct questions with equal directness. "Why are you doing all this for my granddaughter?" she asked finally. Paul's answer came without hesitation. "Because I love her." The simple declaration, spoken not to Leslie but about her, in the sterile hospital room with its beeping monitors and antiseptic smell, hit her with the force of revelation. He hadn't said the words directly to her since that night on the terrace, as if giving her space to catch up to his certainty. Her grandmother's expression revealed nothing, but she extended a frail hand to Paul, who took it gently between both of his. "Then you'd better not hurt her," she said, the warning clear despite her weakened state. "I would cut off my own arm first," Paul replied with such solemn sincerity that Leslie's throat tightened with emotion. Later, walking to the parking lot with his arm around her shoulders, Leslie leaned into his strength. "Did you mean it?" she asked softly. "What you said to my grandmother?" Paul stopped, turning to face her fully. The security lights cast half his face in shadow, but his eyes burned with intensity. "Every word." He cupped her face in his hands, his touch reverent. "I've never felt this way about anyone, Leslie. I think I've been waiting for you my whole life without knowing it." The kiss that followed was tender, yet demanding, a physical manifestation of the declaration he'd made. When they separated, both breathing heavily, the connection between them felt unbreakable, a cord of golden light binding them together despite the circumstances that should have kept them apart. 2 weeks later, with her grandmother improving steadily and moved to a rehabilitation facility, Leslie returned to her teaching position. Life began to resume its rhythm, though now irrevocably altered by Paul's presence in it. He'd become a fixture at her small apartment, bringing work with him many evenings just to be near her, It was after one such evening, as they lay tangled together in her narrow bed, that Paul's phone rang with an urgency that couldn't be ignored. "Gilbert," he answered, his voice transforming into the crisp, authoritative tone he used for business. As he listened, his body tensed beside her. "I'll be right there," he said finally, already rising to dress. "What is it?" Leslie asked, concerned by the grim set of his mouth. "Our systems have been compromised. Someone's accessing sensitive financial data." He bent to kiss her quickly. "I have to go." She nodded, understanding without needing details. This was part of loving him, accepting the demands of his position, just as he accepted the papers she graded even on weekends. What she didn't expect was the headline that greeted her the next morning. "Gilbert Industries under federal investigation." Her phone had several missed calls from Paul. Before she could return them, a sharp knock at her door startled her. Opening it, she found not Paul, but his sister Diane, her usual poise replaced by obvious distress. "Have you seen the news?" Diane demanded, brushing past Leslie into the apartment. "Just the headline." "What's happening?" Diane's face was pale with strain. "They're saying there's evidence of financial impropriety, stock manipulation, insider trading. It's all lies, but the damage is spreading like wildfire." Leslie sank onto her sofa, trying to process the implications. "Where's Paul?" "With the legal team. He's been there all night." Diane paced the small living room. "This isn't random, Leslie. Someone orchestrated this attack precisely when our new merger was about to be announced. The way Diane included her in the family crisis with that "our" didn't escape Leslie's notice. Somehow in these past months she'd been drawn into the Gilbert orbit in ways she hadn't fully realized. "How can I help?" she asked simply. Diane stopped pacing, regarding her with an unreadable expression. "You really do love him, don't you?" The question caught Leslie off guard. "Of course I do. Even with all this." Diane gestured vaguely, encompassing the scandal, the complications, the vast differences in their lives that had never seemed more apparent than in this moment of crisis. "Especially with all this," Leslie replied, the certainty in her voice surprising even herself. Something shifted in Diane's face. Respect, perhaps, or simply relief. "Then stand by him, because it's going to get worse before it gets better." She wasn't wrong. By evening, news vans were parked outside Leslie's apartment building, reporters shouting questions as she tried to make her way inside after visiting her grandmother. "Ms. Alve, what's your relationship with Paul Gilbert? Did you know about the fraud allegations before they became public? Are you just a distraction he created to divert attention from the investigation?" Leslie pushed past them, heart pounding, hands shaking as she fumbled with her keys. Inside, she leaned against the door, breathing hard, the cruel insinuations echoing in her mind. Her phone rang. Paul, finally. "Are you okay?" His voice was ragged with exhaustion. "I just heard about the reporters. I'm sending security to your building." "I don't need security," she protested. "I need you to tell me what's happening." The silence that followed was heavy with things unsaid. "It's complicated, Leslie." "Then uncomplicate it," she insisted. "Don't shut me out, Paul, not now." Another silence then. "It's a setup. Someone on the inside has been manipulating records, making it look like I authorized questionable transactions. The timing is too perfect to be coincidence." "Who would do that?" "I have my suspicions." His voice hardened. "But until I have proof, I can't make accusations." Something in his tone sent a chill through her. "Paul, you're scaring me." "I'm sorry," he said, softening immediately. "The last thing I want is for you to be caught up in this mess. Maybe it would be better if we—" "Don't," she cut him off, suddenly terrified of what he might suggest. "Don't you dare push me away to protect me, Leslie." "No, I love you, Paul Gilbert. All of you. Not just the successful businessman in the perfect suit, but the man who reads stories to his nephew and holds my hand in hospital waiting rooms. Whatever this is, we face it together. The rawness of her declaration hung between them, a challenge and a promise. When Paul finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I don't deserve you." "Too bad," she replied, anger and love tangled together. "You're stuck with me." A sound that might have been a laugh or a sob came through the line. "I'll come to you as soon as I can. Lock your doors until then." "I will," she promised. "And, Paul, whoever's behind this, they don't know who they're dealing with, not just you, but us." After they hung up, Leslie stood in her quiet apartment, the weight of what they were facing settling over her. The scandal, the reporters, the uncertainty, it should have terrified her, made her question everything about their relationship. Instead, she felt a strange, fierce clarity. The external pressures weren't pulling them apart, as their enemies might have hoped. They were revealing the unbreakable strength of what she and Paul had built together, a connection forged in crisis and tempered by love. Outside, camera flashes illuminated her window as reporters continued their vigil. Leslie drew the curtains closed, shutting out their intrusion. When Paul arrived, they would face this storm together. And God help whoever had unleashed it, because they were about to discover that Leslie Alve, the kindergarten teacher who had once rushed into traffic to save a child, was prepared to be just as fearless in protecting the man she loved. Chapter 6. Surrender. 3 days passed with Paul working around the clock, appearing at Leslie's apartment only for brief moments to hold her tight before disappearing again into the storm of accusations and legal meetings. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and the confident set of his shoulders had given way to a tension that never quite left him. The media frenzy intensified. Photographers lurked outside Leslie's school until the principal called the police. Opinion pieces dissected their relationship, painting Leslie alternately as a gold digger or an innocent pawn in Paul's schemes. "Don't read any of it," Diane advised during her daily check-ins, which had become a surprising source of comfort. "It's all garbage." Leslie tried to follow the advice, but the whispers followed her everywhere. Parents at school pulling their children away as she passed. Colleagues going silent when she entered the teacher's lounge. The weight of suspicion bore down, heavy and suffocating. It was after a particularly difficult day, when a parent had openly asked the principal to remove their child from that woman's class, that Leslie found herself sitting in her car, tears flowing unchecked. Her phone buzzed with a text from Paul. "Meeting with investigators. Will call when I can. Miss you." She started to type a reassuring response, then stopped, suddenly overwhelmed. What if this never ended? What if Paul's world, with its ruthless competitors and public scrutiny, would always be a battleground? Was she strong enough to live in that spotlight? Her phone rang, not Paul, but the rehabilitation center. "Miss Alve, your grandmother is asking for you. She seems upset." Wiping her tears, Leslie drove straight there, forcing her personal turmoil aside. Her grandmother, looking smaller than ever in the hospital bed, fixed her with a penetrating gaze. "You've been crying," she stated, patting the bed beside her. "Sit." Leslie obeyed, the comfort of her grandmother's presence releasing fresh tears. "It's a mess, Grandma. Everyone thinks Paul is guilty of terrible things, and they're looking at me like I'm either his accomplice or his victim." Her grandmother's papery hand covered hers. "And what do you think?" "I know he's innocent," Leslie answered without hesitation. "Then nothing else matters." The older woman's voice was soft but firm. "When I married your grandfather, his family disowned him. Said I wasn't good enough, the daughter of immigrants, with no dowry, no connections. They said it wouldn't last a month." Leslie blinked, surprised. Her grandmother rarely spoke of those early days. "I didn't know that." 52 years, We had. Together before God took him home. Pride shone in her weathered face. Every day a choice to love, to stay, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. She squeezed Leslie's hand with surprising strength. This man of yours, does he make that choice each day? To love you, to stay even when it's hard? The question pierced straight to Leslie's heart. Despite the chaos surrounding them, despite the easy option of distancing himself from her to simplify his legal battles, Paul had remained steadfast, protecting her, including her, choosing her daily. "Yes," she whispered, "he does. Then you make that same choice. The rest will sort itself out." Something rigid within Leslie softened at her grandmother's words. The fears and doubts that had been building like a wall around her heart began to crumble. "Now," her grandmother continued, eyes twinkling, "tell me about this special treatment I'm getting. The nurses fall over themselves every time that handsome doctor visits, the one your young man arranged." Leslie stiffened. "What? Special doctor?" "The lung specialist from Boston, I think." Her grandmother frowned at Leslie's expression. "You didn't know? Paul had arranged a specialist without telling her. Had paid who knew how much to ensure her grandmother received the best care possible, and had never mentioned it. Not once. Not even to take credit. The realization hit Leslie with the force of a physical blow. This was who Paul Gilbert truly was. Not the powerful CEO on magazine covers, but a man who quietly moved mountains for those he loved, seeking nothing in return. Her phone rang again. Paul, finally. "I need to take this," she told her grandmother, stepping into the hallway. "Leslie," his voice was strained, exhausted, "I'm sorry I couldn't call sooner. You got my grandmother a specialist from Boston." The words tumbled out, half accusation, half wonder, a pause, then, "She deserves the best care." "Why didn't you tell me?" Another pause. "It wasn't important that you knew I arranged it, only that she got what she needed." The simple response crystallized everything Leslie had been struggling to articulate, even to herself. This man who could have anyone, who lived in a world so different from hers, had chosen to love her with a depth and selflessness that defied explanation. "Paul," she said, her voice breaking, "I need to see you tonight, no matter how late." "Is everything okay?" Concern sharpened his tone. "Yes," she assured him, "just please come when you can." Hours later, close to midnight, a soft knock at her door roused Leslie from where she'd been dozing on the couch. She opened it to find Paul looking utterly depleted, his usual impeccable appearance replaced by rumpled clothes and stubbled cheeks. Without a word, she pulled him inside and into her arms. He came willingly, burying his face in her neck, his body sagging against hers, as if he'd been holding himself together by sheer will until this moment. "I'm so tired, Leslie," he whispered, the admission clearly costing him. She led him to the couch, where he sank down, eyes closing briefly, before fixing on her face with weary intensity. "The lawyers think we're close to identifying who altered the records, but the damage to the company's reputation—" He trailed off, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "We'll rebuild it," Leslie said firmly, sitting beside him. "Together." Something flickered in his eyes, hope, perhaps, or simply relief at her use of we. "I've been trying to shield you from the worst of it. The things they're saying about you, about us. I don't care what they say." She took his hands in hers, marveling at how natural it felt now, this connection between them that had once seemed so improbable. "I only care what's true." "And what's true?" he asked softly, a vulnerability in his question that few would ever hear from Paul Gilbert. Leslie met his gaze steadily. "That I love you. That I choose you today and every day, no matter how hard it gets. That I'm not going anywhere." The raw emotion that crossed his face stole her breath. He pulled her to him with gentle urgency, his kiss a desperate affirmation of everything she'd just professed. When they separated, both breathing hard, the weariness in his eyes had been replaced by something brighter, more determined. "Marry me," he said suddenly, the words hanging in the quiet apartment like a revelation. Leslie froze, certain she'd misheard. "What?" "Marry me," Paul repeated more firmly this time. He shifted, sliding to one knee before her, still holding her hands. "I don't have a ring. This isn't how I planned to ask. But I can't wait another day to know that you're mine, completely and officially." "Paul, think about what you're saying," Leslie protested, even as her heart raced with impossible joy. "In the middle of this scandal, that's exactly why," he interrupted, his eyes never leaving hers, "because when everything else was falling apart, you were the one thing I was sure of. Because I want to face whatever comes next with you by my side, not just as my girlfriend, but as my wife." He brought her hands to his lips, kissing them with reverence. "I've spent my life building a company, acquiring things I thought mattered, but none of it means anything compared to you. You've shown me what really counts. And I want to spend the rest of my life counting those things with you." Tears spilled down Leslie's cheeks, but they were tears of a happiness so profound it bordered on pain. This moment, this impossible, perfect moment, was everything she'd never allowed herself to dream of. "Yes," she whispered, the word catching on a sob of joy. "Yes, I'll marry you." Paul rose to his feet, pulling her up with him. And then she was in his arms, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that sealed their promise. It was tender at first, then increasingly urgent as the reality of their commitment ignited something primal. Between them, his hands tangled in her hair, angling her head to deepen the kiss, while hers slipped beneath his shirt to find the warm skin of his back. The world beyond her apartment ceased to exist. The scandal, the reporters, the uncertainty of tomorrow, all of it faded against the absolute certainty of their passion for each other. Later, much later, they lay tangled together in her bed, the moonlight casting silver patterns across their entwined bodies. Paul traced lazy circles on her bare shoulder, his expression peaceful for the first time in days. "Tomorrow," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I'll buy you a ring worthy of you." Leslie shook her head, smiling against his chest. "I don't need diamonds or anything fancy." "I know you don't," he replied, tilting her chin up to meet his gaze. "That's exactly why I want to give them to you. Not because you expect them, but because you deserve everything beautiful this world has to offer." The simple sincerity of his words melted something in her that had been frozen for too long. A belief that love like this wasn't meant for ordinary people like her, that passion this consuming was reserved for storybooks and films. "When did you know," she asked softly, "that this was real between us?" Paul's expression grew thoughtful. "There wasn't one moment. It was 1,000 little moments. The way you looked at Thomas that first day, willing to risk everything for a child you didn't know. How you stood your ground when I tried to throw money at the problem. Your face when you read to your students." His fingers traced the curve of her cheek with wonder. "But if I had to choose one moment, it was the night you refused to let me push you away. When the scandal broke. When you said we'd face it together." His voice dropped to a whisper. "No one has ever chosen to stand with me like that, expecting nothing in return." Leslie understood then, with perfect clarity, what her grandmother had meant about love being a daily choice. Paul had spent his life surrounded by people who wanted something from him, his money, his influence, the reflected glory of his success. Until her, perhaps no one had ever simply wanted him, just as he was. "I will always choose you," she promised, sealing the vow with a kiss that quickly reignited the passion between them. As dawn broke over the city, casting golden light through the thin curtains, they lay awake still, reluctant to surrender even a moment of their newfound certainty to sleep. Whatever challenges awaited them in the coming days, the ongoing investigation, the media scrutiny, the merging of their vastly different worlds, they would face them united. For in choosing each other, in surrendering to the unexpected love that had ambushed them both that fateful day in the park, they had found a strength neither possessed alone, a strength born of complete acceptance, of seeing each other's truest selves and saying, without reservation or condition, yes, you, always. Chapter 7, Crisis Point. The diamond on Leslie's finger caught the morning light, sending prisms dancing across her classroom walls. Despite her protests, Paul had insisted on a ring that made her gasp when he'd presented it. Elegant yet understated, perfectly suited to her tastes while still unmistakably valuable. "Good morning, Miss Alve," her students chorused as they filed in, several pointing excitedly at the sparkling addition to her hand. "Is that a princess ring?" 5-year-old Zoe asked, eyes wide with wonder. Leslie smiled, kneeling to the child's level. "It's an engagement ring. It means I'm going to get married." "To a prince?" another child asked hopefully. "To someone very special to me," Leslie answered, her heart warming at the thought of Paul, who had left her apartment at dawn with a lingering kiss and a promise to call later. The school day passed in a blur of excitement, colleagues offering congratulations tinged with curiosity about her whirlwind romance with one of the city's most prominent businessmen. The scandal surrounding Gilbert Industries had begun to fade from headlines as evidence mounted supporting Paul's claims of sabotage, though the damage to company stock prices remained significant. As her students worked on an art project, Leslie's phone vibrated with a text from Diane. "Need to see you. Important. Can you come by after school?" The urgency in the message sent a flutter of concern through her. She and Diane had developed an unlikely friendship over the past months, but unscheduled meetings were unusual. When Leslie arrived at Diane's house that afternoon, she found not just Diane, but Thomas's nanny and a man she recognized as Paul's head of security waiting in the living room, their expressions grave. "What's happened?" Leslie asked immediately, dread pooling in her stomach. "Is it Paul?" Diane's face was pale with strain. "Thomas is missing." "What do you mean, missing?" "He never arrived at his piano lesson after school," the nanny explained, voice trembling. "I dropped him at the studio door, watched him go inside, then went to run a quick errand before pickup. When I returned, they said he'd never checked in with his teacher." "We've searched the building, the surrounding blocks," the security chief added. "No sign of him. Security cameras show him entering, but not leaving through any main exit. It's as if he vanished." "Have you called the police?" Leslie asked, maternal instinct flaring protectively. Diane nodded. "They're treating it as a potential kidnapping, given Paul's position and the recent threats." Threats? This was the first Leslie had heard of any threats against Paul personally. "Since the scandal broke," Diane explained, her composed facade cracking slightly. "Nothing specific, just enough to warrant extra security. Paul didn't want to worry you." Anger flashed through Leslie at being kept in the dark, but concern for Thomas quickly overshadowed it. "Where is Paul now?" "In emergency meetings with the board. His phone is off. Security is trying to reach him." Diane's hands twisted together anxiously. "I didn't know who else to call. Thomas talks about you constantly. If anyone might have insight into where he could have gone." Leslie closed her eyes, forcing herself to think clearly. Thomas was a bright, curious child, but also deeply attached to routine and rules. For him to wander off alone would be completely out of character. Unless her eyes snapped open. "What day is it?" "Wednesday," Diane replied, confused by the question. "The 23rd, Leslie clarified, mind racing. "Thomas told me 2 weeks ago he was making something special, a surprise for someone's birthday. He was very secretive about it." Recognition dawned on Diane's face. "My birthday is tomorrow. But how would he—" Is there somewhere special you go together? Somewhere he might think to leave a gift for you to find? Diane thought for a moment, then gasped. The park, where the accident happened. We've gone back several times because he wanted to see where his hero teacher saved him. He says it's a magical place. It was thin, but it was something. Let's go, Leslie said firmly. Now, as they drove to the park, dark clouds gathered overhead, the first heavy drops of rain splattering against the windshield as they arrived. The park was nearly deserted due to the impending storm, making their search both easier and more urgent. Thomas, they called, spreading out across the expansive grounds, focusing on the area near the street where the incident had occurred months ago. The rain intensified, soaking through Leslie's light jacket as she scanned playground equipment, picnic areas, and walking paths. Fear knotted her stomach as minutes stretched on with no sign of the boy. Ms. Alve, the small voice nearly stopped her heart. She whirled to see Thomas emerging from a cluster of trees, clutching a sodden package wrapped in colourful paper. "Thomas!" Leslie ran to him, dropping to her knees on the wet ground to pull him into her arms. "We've been so worried." The boy's face crumpled with remorse. "I wanted to hide Mom's present in our special place, but then it started raining, and I got scared. It's okay, sweetheart, you're safe now." She smoothed his wet hair back from his forehead, relief making her voice shake. Diane appeared, tears mingling with raindrops on her face as she embraced her son. "Don't you ever do that again, Thomas. You know better than to go anywhere alone." "I'm sorry, Mommy," Thomas sobbed, his small body trembling with cold and emotion. "I just wanted to surprise you." As Diane enfolded her son in a fierce hug, Leslie stood, suddenly aware of how thoroughly drenched they all were. The storm had intensified into a downpour, lightning flashing across the darkened sky. "We need to get him warm," she said. Practical, concerns overriding emotion. "My apartment is closest." They hurried to the car, Thomas wrapped in Diane's jacket, his gift still clutched protectively to his chest, despite its sodden state. As they pulled away from the curb, Leslie texted Paul's security team with the update, relief flooding her, when a response came immediately that they would notify Paul. By the time they reached Leslie's apartment, the storm had transformed into a full-blown tempest, wind howling around the building's corners. Inside, Leslie quickly found dry clothes for Thomas, a t-shirt from her dresser that hung to his knees, and towels for them all. The power might go out, she warned, noting the flickering lights as she prepared hot chocolate for Thomas. "But I have candles and flashlights ready." As if summoned by her words, the apartment plunged into darkness, drawing a startled yelp from Thomas. "It's okay," Leslie soothed, using her phone's flashlight to locate and light several candles. The warm glow created a cozy atmosphere despite the storm raging outside. Thomas, wrapped in a blanket on the couch, appeared more fascinated than frightened by the blackout. "It's like camping," he declared, clutching his mug of hot chocolate. Diane, wearing borrowed sweats that were slightly too short for her taller frame, smiled at her son's resilience. "You gave us quite a scare, young man." "I know." Thomas looked genuinely contrite. "But I wanted to put your present in the magic place where Miss Alve saved me, so you could find it tomorrow, and it would be extra special." His innocent explanation pierced Leslie's heart. This child, who had unwittingly brought her and Paul together, continued to see magic in a moment that could have ended in tragedy. A pounding at the door startled them all. Leslie hurried to answer it, candle in hand, not surprised to find Paul on the threshold, soaked to the skin and wild-eyed with worry. "They're here," she assured him immediately, stepping aside to let him enter. "They're safe." The relief that washed over Paul's face was almost painful to witness. He strode directly to Thomas, dropping to one knee before the boy. "Uncle Paul," Thomas exclaimed, seemingly oblivious to the fear he'd caused. "We're having a blackout adventure." Paul pulled the child into a fierce embrace, his eyes closing briefly, as if in prayer. "Don't ever disappear like that again," he murmured into Thomas's hair. "You scared us all half to death." "I'm sorry," Thomas repeated, his small arms wrapping around Paul's neck. "I just wanted to do something special for Mom's birthday." Paul released him reluctantly, rising to embrace his sister, who for once allowed her composed facade to crumble completely. "He's okay," Paul reassured her quietly. "That's all that matters." Only then did he turn to Leslie, his eyes reflecting the candlelight as they swept over her. Damp hair curling wildly around her face, borrowed too large sweater falling off one shoulder, engagement ring glinting in the flickering light. "I found him," he said simply, the words laden with gratitude beyond expression. "We found him together," Leslie corrected, glancing at Diane, who nodded in acknowledgement of their unlikely partnership. Outside, thunder cracked so loudly it seemed to shake the building's foundation. The storm showed no signs of abating, trapping them all in the small apartment for the foreseeable future. "Looks like we're having an impromptu sleepover," Leslie observed, trying to lighten the mood. Thomas, already bouncing back from his ordeal, clapped his hands in delight. "Can we tell ghost stories?" "Absolutely not," Diane and Paul replied in unison, drawing laughter from Leslie and a pout from Thomas. As they settled in to wait out the storm, Leslie found herself observing the tableau they created. Thomas nestled between Diane and Paul on her small sofa, the three of them forming a picture of family that stirred something deep and yearning within her. Paul caught her watching and extended his hand, silently inviting her to join them. When she did, fitting herself beside him with Thomas's feet in her lap, the circle felt complete in a way that defied rational explanation. Later, with Thomas finally asleep in Leslie's bed and Diane dozing on the couch, Paul and Leslie sat at her tiny kitchen table, the candles burning low as the storm continued its assault outside. "I need to tell you something," Paul said, his voice low to avoid waking the others, "about the investigation." Leslie studied his face in the golden light, noting the tension that had returned to his features. "You've found who's responsible?" It wasn't a question, but Paul nodded anyway. "My CFO, James Harrington. The evidence is conclusive. He doctored records, planted false data, timed the leaks perfectly to maximize damage." "Why?" Leslie asked, struggling to understand such deliberate. "Alice," Paul's mouth tightened. "I passed him over for promotion last year. He felt entitled to a position I gave to someone more qualified, someone younger, with less experience but more vision." The pettiness of the motive stunned Leslie. "He tried to destroy your entire company over a wounded ego. Pride makes people capable of incredible destruction." Paul's hand found hers across the table, his thumb absently stroking her engagement ring. "The board wants blood. They're pressing for criminal charges, financial penalties that would ruin him completely." "And what do you want?" Leslie asked, quietly recognizing the conflict in his eyes. Paul was silent for a long moment, the candle flames reflecting in his dark gaze. 5 years ago, I would have wanted the same, to crush him, to make an example of him. And now?" His eyes met hers, vulnerable in a way he showed to no one else. "Now I find myself thinking about mercy, about second chances." His fingers tightened around hers. "You've changed me, Leslie, in ways I'm only beginning to understand." The raw emotion in his voice took her breath away. This man, whom the world saw as ruthless and calculating, was revealing a capacity for compassion that few would believe existed. "Whatever you decide," she said softly, "I'm with you." Paul brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her, a palm that sent warmth spiraling through her despite the chill of the powerless apartment. "When I thought Thomas was missing," he confessed, voice barely audible, "all I could think was that I needed you. Not my security team, not the police, you. Because you see possibilities where others see only problems. You find hope in the darkest moments. He rose then, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. I've built my life around control, Leslie. Controlling outcomes, circumstances, people, but loving you. Loving you has taught me that the most powerful thing I can do is surrender that control, to trust, to have faith. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating his face. Earnest, vulnerable, transformed by love in ways neither of them could have imagined that first day in the park. Leslie reached up, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw, marveling at how this man who commanded boardrooms and moved markets could look at her with such reverence. I think, she whispered, that's what love really is. Not possession, not protection, but surrender. Choosing to fall, trusting the other person will catch you. Paul's hands cradled her face, his eyes burning with an intensity that stole her breath. I am falling, Leslie Alve, every day a little further. His voice dropped to a whisper. And I've never felt safer in my life. When his lips found hers, the kiss was different from their others, deeper, more certain, a promise not just of passion, but of a future neither had dared imagine before finding the other. The storm raged on outside, but within the circle of Paul's arms, Leslie found a peace she had never known, the certainty that whatever challenges awaited them, they would face them together, stronger for having found each other in the most unexpected of circumstances. And as the candles burned low, casting their embracing shadows against the wall, both understood without words that they had reached a turning point from which there was no return. Whatever came next, wedding plans or corporate battles, family celebrations or public scrutiny, they would navigate it together, bound by a love that had begun with a simple act of courage and grown into something neither could live without. Chapter 8: Fire and Ice. The storm passed, leaving the city cleansed and glistening under a cold autumn sun. In the week since Thomas's disappearance and rescue, life had begun settling into a new rhythm, one that increasingly merged Paul and Leslie's worlds despite their differences. Paul's company was slowly recovering from the scandal. James Harrington had been quietly removed from his position, accepting a settlement that required his silence but stopped short of financial ruin, a decision that had raised eyebrows among Paul's board members but strengthened Leslie's certainty that she was marrying a man whose moral compass pointed true. Are you sure about this? Paul asked as they pulled up to Diane's house for the dinner where they would officially announce their engagement to Thomas and a few close family members. His fingers tapped nervously against the steering wheel, revealing his anxiety. Leslie reached over, stilling his hand with hers. Never been more sure of anything. The smile that transformed his face made her heart skip. Even now, months into their relationship, the intensity of his feelings for her sometimes caught her off guard. This powerful man who looked at her as though she were the most precious thing in his universe. Inside, Thomas greeted them with his usual exuberance, immediately noticing the ring that now adorned Leslie's finger. "Is that a magic ring?" he asked, eyes wide as he examined the sparkling diamond. "Kind of," Leslie answered, smiling at Paul over the boy's head. "It means your Uncle Paul and I are going to get married." Thomas's face lit up. "So you'll be my aunt? For real?" "For real," Paul confirmed, ruffling the boy's hair. Thomas launched himself at Leslie, wrapping small arms around her waist. "I knew it. I knew you were supposed to be in our family." The simple, childish certainty brought tears to Leslie's eyes. She hugged him back, looking up to find Diane watching them from the doorway, her expression unreadable. Dinner was a stilted affair. Diane's parents, Paul's aunt and uncle, who had helped raise the siblings after their own parents' deaths, were politely welcoming but clearly surprised by the engagement. their questions about wedding plans thinly veiling their curiosity about this unexpected addition to the family. "So you're a kindergarten teacher," Paul's aunt commented, her tone suggesting this was an exotic profession she'd only heard about. "How fulfilling that must be." "It is," Leslie replied evenly, having grown accustomed to such reactions. "Every day is different, and watching children discover their potential is the greatest reward imaginable." "Hardly the same as running a multinational corporation, though," Diane's father observed, glancing at Paul. "Different worlds entirely." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Paul's hand found Leslie's under the tablecloth, squeezing gently. "That's what makes it work," he said firmly. "Leslie reminds me daily of what truly matters beyond profit margins and stock prices." Dinner concluded with forced pleasantries, the tension evident to everyone except Thomas, who chattered happily about having Leslie at all future family gatherings. As they helped clear the dishes, Diane pulled Leslie aside, her voice low. "Can we talk? In private?" They retreated to Diane's study, a sleek space that reflected its owner's precise personality. Diane closed the door, then turned to face Leslie. With startling directness, "I've supported this relationship from the beginning," she began. "After what you did for Thomas, how could I not? But marriage, Leslie, so quickly. Are you truly prepared for what being a Gilbert entails?" The question stung, but Leslie maintained her composure. "I'm marrying Paul, not his last name or his company." "It's not that simple," Diane countered. "The scrutiny never ends. Every decision, every move analyzed and judged. The expectations are crushing." Her voice softened slightly. "I've watched it break stronger people than you." "You don't know how strong I am," Leslie replied quietly, a hint of steel in her tone. "Perhaps not," Diane conceded. "But I know my brother. He's impulsive when his heart is involved, rare as that is. This whirlwind romance, coming right after the trauma with Thomas, the scandal. I fear he's not thinking clearly." "You think I'm taking advantage of his vulnerability?" Leslie asked, unable to keep the hurt from her voice. "I think neither of you has considered the long-term reality," Diane responded. "The novelty will fade, Leslie, and then what will you have in common? What foundation will sustain you when your worlds inevitably pull you in different directions?" Before Leslie could respond, the door opened and Paul stood there, his expression darkening as he read the tension in the room. "What's going on?" he demanded. "Just a heart-to-heart between future sisters-in-law," Diane replied smoothly, though her eyes betrayed her concern. Paul's gaze shifted between them, settling on Leslie's face with uncanny perception. "Diane, May, I speak with you." Alone, Leslie slipped past him, squeezing his arm reassuringly as she left. The door closed behind her, but the study's walls were thin enough that heated voices carried through. "How dare you question my judgment? Someone needs to. You're rushing into—" "I love her, Diane, more than I've ever—" "Love isn't always—" "Enough!" Leslie moved away, not wanting to eavesdrop further, finding refuge in Thomas's playroom, where the boy was contentedly building with Legos. "Are you sad?" he asked perceptively, offering her a colorful brick as if it might help. "A little," she admitted, sitting cross-legged beside him. "Grown-up stuff," Thomas nodded sagely. "Mom and Uncle Paul fight sometimes, but they always make up." He placed another brick carefully. "Uncle Paul says family is forever, even when we're mad." The simple wisdom pulled a smile from Leslie, despite her worries. "Your Uncle Paul is a smart man." "He's smartest about you," Thomas said matter-of-factly. "He told me so." Footsteps in the hallway silenced their conversation. Paul appeared in the doorway, his expression tight with controlled anger. "We're leaving," he announced, his voice gentle despite his evident fury. The drive home was silent, Paul's knuckles white on the steering wheel. Leslie lost in her own thoughts. Not until they reached her apartment did he finally speak. "I'm sorry," he said, turning to face her. Diane was out of line. "She loves you," Leslie replied softly. "She's trying to protect you." "I don't need protection from the best thing that's ever happened to me." The rawness in his voice made her throat tighten. "But maybe she's right about one thing. Maybe we should slow down, give you time to be certain." "Stop." Leslie placed her fingers against his lips. "I'm certain. The question is, are you?" The vulnerability in her question broke through his anger. Paul pulled her to him, his kiss fierce with emotion. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life," he whispered against her lips. What began as reassurance quickly ignited into passion. His hands tangled in her hair, angling her head to deepen the kiss, while hers worked at the buttons of his shirt with urgent need. They barely made it inside her apartment, the door closing behind them as clothing fell to the floor. In their desperate rush to reaffirm what they both knew bone deep, that whatever obstacles lay ahead, the connection between them transcended all differences. Later, wrapped in tangled sheets, Paul traced the curve of her hip with reverent fingers. "Marry me next month," he said suddenly. "Not next year, not in some elaborate ceremony for appearances' sake. Just us, Thomas, your grandmother, the people who matter." Leslie propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face in the moonlight streaming through her window. "You're serious?" "Completely." His eyes held hers with unwavering certainty. "I'm done letting other people's expectations dictate our choices. I want to start our life together now." The simplicity of his declaration washed away Diane's warnings, the family's doubts, all the practical concerns that came with merging their disparate worlds. In their place remained only the essential truth that had guided them from the beginning, that in saving Thomas that day in the park, Leslie had set in motion events that would save them both in ways neither could have imagined. "Yes," she whispered, lowering her mouth to his. "Next month, just us." As his arms encircled her, drawing her back into the heat of their passion, Leslie understood that they had crossed a final threshold. No longer were they navigating between separate worlds, but creating a new one entirely their own. A world built on the foundation of a love that had overcome every obstacle thrown in its path, emerging stronger with each test. Chapter 9. Heart's Collision. 3 weeks before their planned wedding, the first snowfall of winter blanketed the city in glistening white. Leslie stood at her classroom window, watching her students' excitement as they pressed small faces against the glass, marveling at the transformed playground. Her phone buzzed with a message from Paul. "Dinner cancelled. Emergency board meeting. I'm sorry." Disappointment flickered through her, quickly replaced by understanding. The aftermath of the corporate scandal continued to demand Paul's attention, especially as they approached the year-end financial disclosures. It was the third cancelled date this week, but Leslie refused to let it trouble her. This was the reality of loving a man with his responsibilities. "Ms. Alve," a child called, tugging at her sleeve. "Can we go outside? Please?" The eager faces around her made resistance impossible. "Coats and mittens first," she laughed, helping small hands navigate zippers and buttons. In the swirling snow, surrounded by the pure joy of children experiencing winter's first magic, Leslie found herself thinking of Thomas. The boy had become increasingly precious to her, his acceptance of her place in their family absolute and uncomplicated, in a way the adults still struggled to achieve. Despite Paul's confrontation with Diane, tensions remained. Diane had apologized, but her concerns lingered beneath the surface of their interactions. The Gilbert family's annual holiday gathering loomed just days away, the first Leslie would attend as Paul's fiancée. The thought filled her with equal parts anticipation and dread. "Teacher's pet," her colleague Sandra teased, joining her on playground duty. "Look who's here." Leslie turned to see Thomas pressed against the fence, separating the public school's playground from the sidewalk. his face split in a wide grin, snowflakes catching in his eyelashes. Beside him stood not Diane but Paul, looking strangely out of place in his business suit amid the winter wonderland. "Uncle Paul wanted to surprise you," Thomas called, waving frantically. Leslie's heart skipped at the unexpected sight of them. She made her way to the fence, unable to contain her smile. "What happened to your emergency meeting?" she asked Paul, noting the unusual tension in his expression despite his smile. "Postponed," he replied, reaching through the fence to brush snow from her hair. "I needed to see you more than I needed another rehashing of things we can't change." Something in his tone gave her pause. "Is everything okay?" Before he could answer, Thomas interjected excitedly, "Can we all build a snowman after school? Uncle Paul said maybe if you're not busy." Leslie glanced at her watch. "I finish in an hour. Why don't you two start gathering snow and I'll join?" "You in the park across the street?" Thomas cheered, tugging at Paul's hand. "Come on, we need to find the perfect snow." As they walked away, Leslie couldn't shake the feeling that something was troubling Paul. The set of his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes, subtle signs few would notice, but which had become as familiar to her as her own reflection. An hour later, bundled in her warmest coat, Leslie crossed to the park, where an impressive beginning of a snowman awaited. Thomas waved excitedly, his cheeks flushed with cold and exertion. "We made him huge," he proclaimed proudly. Uncle Paul lifted. "Me to put on his head." Paul stood back, surveying their creation with exaggerated seriousness that made Leslie smile. He'd abandoned his suit jacket and tie, his white shirt now damp with melted snow. The sight of him, this powerful, sophisticated man, reduced to childlike joy by his nephew's enthusiasm, filled her with a love so overwhelming it almost hurt. "What do you think?" Paul asked, moving to her side. "Up to your professional teacher standards?" "Definitely A+ work," she assured him, leaning into his embrace despite the cold. They worked together to finish the snowman, finding stones for eyes and buttons, a carrot for his nose, an old scarf for warmth. Thomas directed their efforts with the seriousness of a film director, his imagination transforming the simple snow sculpture into an adventure. As dusk approached, bringing with it dropping temperatures, Diane arrived to collect Thomas. "You're all soaked," she observed, though her tone held more amusement than criticism. "I've got hot chocolate waiting at home. Can Miss Leslie and Uncle Paul come too?" Thomas pleaded, not ready for the day's magic to end. Diane hesitated, then nodded. "Of course. There's plenty for everyone." The invitation surprised Leslie, suggesting perhaps a thawing in Diane's reservations. As they gathered their things, Thomas suddenly darted away. "I forgot to give the snowman a smile," he called over his shoulder, racing back toward their creation. In the gathering darkness, "Thomas, wait," Diane called, but the boy had already disappeared around a stand of trees. "I'll get him," Paul said, striding after his nephew. Leslie and Diane followed more slowly, their breath forming clouds in the increasingly frigid air. They had just cleared the trees when Leslie heard Paul's shout, a sound of such raw terror it stopped her heart. "Thomas!" Ahead, the ground sloped down toward a small pond, usually harmless but now partially frozen and treacherous. Thomas stood at its edge, reaching for a branch that had fallen onto the thin ice. "Thomas, don't move!" Leslie called, instinctively breaking into a run, even as she registered Paul doing the same. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Thomas, turning at the sound of their voices, his foot slipping on the icy bank, his small body pitching forward toward the partially frozen water, Paul lunging for him, catching the back of his coat but losing his own footing on the slippery slope. Leslie reached them just as Paul managed to swing Thomas away from the danger, the momentum sending the boy safely up the bank, but causing Paul to crash through the thin ice at the pond's edge. "Paul!" The scream tore from her throat as he disappeared to his shoulders in the frigid water, his face contorted with shock at the cold. Without hesitation, Leslie dropped to her stomach at the pond's edge, extending her arms toward him. "Take my hands!" Paul's eyes locked with hers, determination replacing shock as he fought against the dragging weight of his waterlogged clothing. His fingers, already numbing from cold, grasped hers with desperate strength. With Diane's help, they pulled him from the water, his body shaking violently as the bitter wind hit his soaked clothes. Thomas stood nearby, tears streaming down his face, his earlier joy replaced by terror. "I'm sorry," he sobbed. "I didn't mean to—" "It's okay," Paul managed through chattering teeth, reaching for the boy despite his own distress. "Not your fault." They hurried to Diane's house, which, thankfully, was only 2 blocks away. Once inside, Leslie took charge, her teacher's instincts kicking in as she directed Paul to a hot shower while she found dry clothes for him to borrow from Diane's ex-husband's forgotten belongings. Later, wrapped in blankets before the fireplace, color slowly returning to his face, Paul seemed distant, lost in thoughts he wasn't sharing. Thomas had been put to bed, exhausted by the day's excitement and drama, while Diane busied herself in the kitchen, giving them privacy. "You could have been killed," Leslie said softly, the reality of the afternoon's events finally hitting her. "If the water had been deeper—" "But it wasn't," Paul interrupted, taking her hand. "And Thomas is safe. That's all that matters." "You saved him," she whispered. Again, something flashed in Paul's eyes, a realization or decision. "No, Leslie, you saved us both, from the very beginning." He shifted, sitting up straighter, despite his still evident fatigue. "That day in the park, when you rushed into traffic without thought for yourself, you woke something in me I thought had died years ago. Paul, let me finish." He took both her hands in his. "Today, watching you with your students, with Thomas, seeing the joy you find in the simplest things, it reminded me of what I almost lost by burying myself in work, in responsibilities, in the endless pursuit of success as the world defines it." Outside, snow began falling again, large flakes drifting past the windows in the gathering darkness. Inside, the fire cast golden light across Paul's features as he reached into the pocket of his borrowed sweatpants, withdrawing something small that caught the light. "I've been carrying this for days, waiting for the perfect moment," he said, opening his palm to reveal a small, carved wooden ring. "It belonged to my mother. My father made it for her when they were young and had nothing but each other." Leslie's breath caught at the simple beauty of the object, clearly homemade, polished by years of wear, inset with a tiny amber stone that glowed like captured sunlight. "My engagement ring is beautiful," she said, touching the diamond that sparkled on her finger. "You didn't need—" "I wanted you to have something that represents where we came from, not just where we're going," Paul explained, his voice husky with emotion. "Something that reminds us both that true wealth has nothing to do with bank accounts or corporate assets." He slid the wooden ring onto the middle finger of her right hand, where it settled as if made for her. "My mother used to say that love isn't about grand gestures, but about choosing each other every day, especially on the hardest days." Tears filled Leslie's eyes as she understood the depth of what he was sharing. Not just a family heirloom, but a glimpse of the roots that had shaped him, the values that had led him to her, despite the seemingly insurmountable differences in their worlds. "Today," Paul continued, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, "when I saw Thomas in danger, I didn't think. I just acted, the way you did that first day. And I realized that's what love really is. Instinct, bone-deep certainty, knowing without question that some things are worth any risk." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to the wooden ring. "I want to move the wedding up. Next week, not next month. I don't want to wait anymore, Leslie. Life is too unpredictable, too precious to waste a single day. The firelight painted shadows across his face, highlighting the vulnerability and certainty warring in his expression. In that moment, all the external pressures fell away. Diane's concerns, the family's doubts, the corporate responsibilities that so often claimed his attention. What remained was simply them, a man and woman who had found in each other something rare and irreplaceable. "Yes," Leslie whispered, leaning forward, to capture his lips with hers. "Next week, no more waiting." His arms encircled her, drawing her against his chest, where she could feel the steady beating of his heart. The heart she had unexpectedly claimed that day in the park. The heart that now belonged to her as completely as hers belonged to him. Outside, the snow continued to fall, erasing footprints and tire tracks, covering the city in a clean blanket of possibility. Inside, wrapped in each other's embrace before the crackling fire, Leslie and Paul sealed their new promise with a kiss that spoke of certainties beyond words. A future built not on circumstances or expectations, but on the unshakable foundation of a love that had defied every obstacle thrown in its path. Chapter 10. Heart's Recognition. Dawn broke over the city, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold as Leslie stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of what would soon be the Gilbert Community Education Center. In just hours, these empty halls would fill with children's laughter, parents' proud smiles, and the beginning of a dream she'd carried in her heart since long before she met Paul. 6 months had passed since their intimate wedding ceremony, just the two of them, Thomas as ring-bearer, her grandmother, and Diane as witnesses. 6 months of building this center together, transforming part of the Gilbert Industries building into a place where children from all backgrounds could learn and grow together. Having second thoughts, Paul's voice, still husky with sleep, came from behind her as his arms encircled her waist, pulling her back against his chest. Leslie leaned into his warmth, watching their reflections in the glass. "Not about us. Never about us." His lips found the sensitive spot below her ear that never failed to make her shiver. "Then what's keeping you awake at 5 a.m. on our big day?" She turned in his arms, taking in the face that had become as essential to her as breathing, strong features softened by love, dark eyes that saw straight to her soul. "What if it fails? What if all those people who said we were too different, that this would never work, were right?" Paul's hands came up to frame her face, his touch reverent even after months of marriage. "Listen to me, Leslie Gilbert. Nothing we've built together could ever be a failure because it was built with love." The simple certainty in his voice steadied her, as it always did. This man, who commanded boardrooms with unflinching authority, had shown her a tenderness few knew existed beneath his powerful exterior. "The donors will be here at 10, she reminded him, smoothing the front of his shirt. "Your former CFO texted yesterday to confirm." Something flickered in Paul's eyes, concern perhaps, though he hid it quickly. "James Harrington is coming? I didn't think he'd accept the invitation. He said he wanted to see what his settlement money helped build." Leslie watched Paul carefully, aware of the complex history between them. Despite the damage Harrington had done to the company, Paul's decision to show mercy had ultimately worked in everyone's favor, allowing for a resolution that didn't destroy lives. "Well, he'll certainly see something unprecedented," Paul replied, his smile returning. "The finest education center in the city, led by the most extraordinary educator I know." His kiss banished her remaining anxiety, igniting the passion that had only deepened with time. What began as comfort quickly blazed into something more urgent. His hands slid beneath her blouse, finding bare skin with practiced ease, while hers made quick work of his shirt buttons. "We should go home," she whispered against his mouth, even as her body arched into his touch. "Someone could—" "It's our building," he reminded her, voice rough with desire as he lifted her onto the desk. "And I need my wife. Now." The possessive edge in his words sent heat spiraling through her. 6 months of marriage had done nothing to dim their hunger for each other. If anything, the intimacy between them had only grown more intense as their lives entwined more completely. Later, as sunlight streamed through the windows, they dressed, with shared glances and stolen kisses that promised more once the day's events concluded. The center would officially open at noon, but staff and volunteers would arrive soon to prepare for the ceremony. "I need to check on the classrooms one more time," Leslie said, fastening the pendant Paul had given her on their wedding day. A small diamond surrounded by a gold shield, symbolizing her protection of his heart. "And I need to review my speech," Paul agreed, though his eyes still held the heat of their earlier passion. "I'll see you at 10. With a final kiss, they parted ways, each attending to last-minute details for the unveiling of what had become their shared vision. A center that combined Paul's business acumen with Leslie's educational expertise, creating something neither could have achieved alone. By 10 o'clock, the main reception area filled with donors, board members, and prominent city officials. Leslie, elegant in a royal blue dress, chosen specifically for the occasion, greeted guests alongside Paul, whose hand rarely left the small of her back. A subtle claim, a reminder of their unbreakable connection. Mrs. Gilbert, a coolly familiar voice, interrupted their conversation with the mayor. Quite the accomplishment. James Harrington stood before them, impeccably dressed and flanked by several former colleagues who had left Gilbert Industries in the wake of the scandal. His smile didn't reach his eyes as he surveyed the transformed space. "So this is what corporate philanthropy looks like when it's personal," he continued, his tone just shy of openly mocking. "A vanity project for the boss's new wife." Paul tensed. Beside her, but Leslie squeezed his hand in silent communication. This was her battle to fight. "Actually, Mr. Harrington," she replied evenly, "this center represents something I believe in deeply, that every child deserves access to quality education regardless of their circumstances. Something I would have thought a man of your background might appreciate." Harrington's smile faltered slightly. "And what would you know of my background, Mrs. Gilbert?" "I know you were the first in your family to attend college, that you worked 2 jobs to pay for your education." Leslie held his gaze steadily, not so different from my own path. The surprise in his eyes confirmed Paul had never shared this information, knowledge he possessed but had never used, even during the worst of the corporate battle. It was Leslie who had researched Harrington's history, seeking to understand. The man who had nearly destroyed what Paul had built. "Well," Harrington said finally, his tone less certain, "the center is impressive. I'll be interested to see if it produces results beyond good publicity." As he moved away with his entourage, Paul turned to her with undisguised admiration. That was masterful. He didn't know what hit him. Leslie smiled, though the encounter had shaken her more than she cared to admit. "I learned from the best negotiator." "I know." The morning proceeded smoothly, with tours for potential donors and press interviews that highlighted the center's innovative approach to education. Yet as noon approached, bringing with it the official ribbon-cutting ceremony, Leslie found herself increasingly withdrawn, the weight of expectations pressing down on her. Excusing herself from a conversation with the school board president, she slipped away from the crowded reception area, seeking a moment of solitude to gather her thoughts. Her feet carried her instinctively to the classroom that would soon be hers, a bright, welcoming space designed for the youngest children the center would serve. Sitting at one of the tiny tables, surrounded by educational materials she had selected, with loving care, Leslie finally allowed her doubts to surface. Harrington's words had struck deeper than she'd shown, voicing the fear that had haunted her from the beginning, that people would see the center as nothing more than Paul indulging. His wife's hobby, rather than the serious educational institution she had dreamed of creating. "You disappeared on me." Paul's voice from the doorway startled her. He stood there, tie slightly loosened, his expression concerned as he took in her posture. "What's wrong?" For a moment, Leslie considered brushing off his concern, putting on the brave face she'd perfected over months of navigating his world. But this was Paul, the one person with whom she had promised never to pretend. "What if they're right?" she asked softly. "What if this is just a vanity project? What if I'm not enough to make it succeed?" Paul crossed the room slowly, pulling a child-sized chair beside hers with careful deliberation, his long legs awkwardly folded to sit at the tiny table. The sight was so unexpected, this powerful man hunched at a kindergartner's desk, that it pulled a reluctant smile from her, despite her worries. "Do you know why I fell in love with you?" he asked, taking her hands in his. Leslie shook her head, caught off guard by the question. "Because you see possibility where others see problems, because your heart is so full of light it spills over onto everyone around you." His thumb traced circles on her palm, a familiar gesture that never failed. "To center her. The day you saved Thomas, you didn't just save his life, you saved mine. Paul, let me finish." His eyes held hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "I was existing, Leslie, not living. Building wealth, expanding the company, but hollow inside. Then you rushed into traffic without a thought for yourself, and in that moment I saw what real courage looks like." He reached into his jacket pocket, withdrawing a folded paper that looked worn from handling. "I've carried this with me every day since Thomas drew it." Carefully unfolding the paper, he revealed the childish drawing Thomas had shown her months ago. 3 stick figures holding hands in front of a car, labeled me, Miss Alv, and Uncle Paul. "This is who we are," Paul said softly. "Not CEO and teacher, not rich and struggling, not powerful and ordinary, just 3 people whose lives connected in the most unexpected way." He traced the simple figures with a gentle finger. "I've had this framed for your office here, because whenever you doubt yourself, whenever you wonder if you belong in this world we've created together, I want you to remember that none of it would exist without you." Tears filled Leslie's eyes at the simple gift that meant more than all, the diamonds or luxuries he had access to. "I love you," she whispered, the words inadequate for the emotion swelling in her chest. "And I love you," he replied, his voice rough with feeling. "More than I ever thought possible." When his lips found hers, the kiss was different from their earlier passion, deeper somehow, infused with a tenderness that spoke of absolute certainty, of souls that had found their missing halves against all odds. They were still lost in each other when a small voice interrupted from the doorway. "Uncle Paul, Aunt Leslie, everyone's looking for you." They broke apart to find Thomas bouncing impatiently, dressed in his best suit for the occasion, his eyes bright with excitement. Behind him stood Diane, who had become not just Leslie's sister-in-law, but a true friend and ally in the months since the wedding. "The mayor wants to start the ceremony," Diane explained, her smile knowing as she took in their close position. "But it seems you two found something more important to do." Leslie felt her cheeks warm, but Paul only laughed, rising from the tiny chair with the natural grace that never failed to captivate her. "We're coming," he assured his sister, helping Leslie to her feet with a gentleness that belied his strength. "Just giving my wife a preview of her first classroom." As they followed Thomas and Diane back toward the main atrium where guests had gathered, Paul kept Leslie's hand firmly in his, leaning close to whisper, "Whatever happens next, remember this. You saved more than a little boy that day. You saved me. Everything else is just details." The ribbon-cutting ceremony passed in a blur of speeches and applause. Paul, ever the confident public speaker, praised Leslie's vision and dedication without a hint of the condescension Harrington had implied. When it came her turn to speak, Leslie found herself looking not at the assembled dignitaries, but at her grandmother in the front row, at Thomas, bouncing excitedly beside her, at Diane, whose proud smile held no trace of her earlier reservations. The Gilbert Community Education Center represents more than just a building or a program, Leslie said, her voice steady with newfound confidence. It represents what happens when we recognize potential in unexpected places, when we reach across the divisions that too often separate us. Her eyes found Paul's in the crowd, drawing strength from his unwavering support. Sometimes, the most important journeys begin with a single moment of courage, a hand extended, a life saved, a heart awakened to new possibilities. As sunlight streamed through the atrium skylights, illuminating the gathered faces of those who had come to witness this new beginning, Leslie felt the last of her doubts fall away. This center, born from the most unlikely of circumstances, would stand as testament to what love could build when given room to flourish. Later, as children from the neighborhood explored the classrooms that would soon become their second home, Leslie found herself back in her own classroom, watching as Thomas showed a group of younger children the proper way to care for the class pet, a responsibility he had begged for since learning of the center's plans. "Happy?" Paul asked, appearing beside her, his jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up after an afternoon of helping families register their children for the upcoming programs. "Beyond words," she replied honestly, leaning into him as his arm encircled her waist. Through the window, they could see the park where everything had begun, where a kindergarten teacher had rushed into traffic to save a child, never imagining how that single act of courage would transform not just her life, but the lives of an entire community. "I was thinking," Paul said, his voice low enough that only she could hear, "that perhaps we should consider expanding our family soon. Thomas has been asking for a cousin." The simple suggestion sent warmth blooming through Leslie's chest. They had discussed children, of course, but always as a future possibility, something to consider once the center was established. "Are you sure we're ready?" she asked, though the idea had already taken root in her heart. Paul turned her to face him fully, his hands spanning her waist as he gazed down at her with an expression of such complete love it nearly overwhelmed her. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life," he said softly. "Building this center with you has shown me what truly matters. And I want everything with you, Leslie, everything." The kiss they shared was a promise of family, of future, of a love that had defied every expectation, growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. "Aunt Leslie!" Thomas called suddenly, breaking the moment. "Joey says he can't come to the center because his mom works late, but he could, right? We have those special classes you made for kids with working parents." Leslie smiled at the boy who had unwittingly changed her life, then at the shy child beside him who represented everything the center was meant to serve. "Absolutely," she assured them both. "That's exactly why we're here." As the afternoon faded into evening, families gradually departed, promises of enrollment forms and upcoming orientations filling the air. Through it all, Paul remained by Leslie's side, his presence a constant reminder of the journey that had brought them to this moment. When the last visitor had gone, leaving them alone in the center they had created together, Paul pulled Leslie into his arms once more. "Do you know what today is?" he asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face with tender fingers. Leslie tilted her head questioningly. 1 year exactly since you rushed into traffic to save Thomas." His voice softened with memory. 1 year since I looked into your eyes for the first time and felt something I couldn't explain. The realization sent a shiver through her. So much had changed in just 1 year, her life completely transformed by a single moment of instinctive courage. "I saved a child," she whispered. "But you saved me too, Paul, from a life half-lived, from never knowing what it means to be truly seen and loved." His kiss was both an acknowledgement and a promise, gentle yet passionate, familiar yet somehow new, as if each touch between them remained a discovery even after months of marriage. When they finally parted, breathless and flushed, the setting, sun cast long shadows across the classroom floor, painting them in gold as if nature itself were blessing the life they had built together. "Take me home," Leslie whispered against his lips, her body already responding to the heat in his gaze. As they walked hand in hand through the center that stood as testament to their unlikely love story, Leslie thought of all the paths that had led to this moment. The fear and doubt, the passion and joy, the thousand small choices that had brought them here. In saving Thomas that fateful day, she had unknowingly saved herself, finding in Paul Gilbert not just a lover or husband, but the missing piece of her soul, the recognition that some heroes don't wear capes or uniforms, but business suits, and some rescues aren't from physical danger, but from lives of quiet loneliness. Outside, the first stars appeared in the twilight sky as Paul opened the car door for her, his hand lingering on hers with a promise of the night to come. The center stood behind them, windows glowing with security lights, ready to welcome its first students in the morning, a dream made reality through the power of unexpected love. "Forever?" Paul asked softly, the question both a promise and a plea, as he gazed at the woman who had transformed his world with a single act of courage. "Forever," Leslie confirmed, sealing the vow with a kiss that held all the passion, tenderness, and certainty their extraordinary journey had taught them. To cherish the unexpected hero who had saved not just a child, but two hearts destined to beat as one.